Imagine it's 2 a.m. and your phone explodes with notifications. Someone just accessed your finance server from a device you don't recognize. Instantly, you're picturing customer data being siphoned off, possible ransom notes, and then all hands on deck crisis. But now imagine you've got a system so locked down, so finely tuned that the minute someone suspicious tries to access critical resources, they hit a wall. Actually, no, they hit a maze of authentication checks and microsegmented barriers that stop them cold. Sounds good to be true? Well, that, my friends, is what we call zero trust architecture. Hey there, welcome back to Bytes and Volts Dialogue. Over the next hour or so, I don't think it'll take an hour, we are going to go on a deep dive into zero trust architecture and why it is more than just a buzzword, how it works in practice, and what it means for everyone from solo entrepreneurs to globe spanning enterprises. Whether you're completely new to cybersecurity or an industry pro, you're about to learn something useful, something you can apply right away to keep data safer and sleep a little bit better at night. Let me give you a quick outline of how we'll spend our time. First, we'll look at why the old castle and moat style of security has fallen out of favor. Then we'll explore the big ideas behind zero trust, what people really mean when they say never trust, always verify, and how concepts like identity management, segmentation, and continuous monitoring play into that. After that, I'll share a deep dive case study of one organization that put zero trust into action, and we'll touch on a few other notable examples like NASA and some telecom giants. Once we've laid down the groundwork, I'll walk you through practical steps for big companies, including those that might be saddled with outdated systems. We'll also focus on how small businesses and even freelancers can get started on a tight budget. I'll speak directly to cybersecurity newcomers so you can see where zero trust fits into the broader security landscape and how you might offer it as a solution to your future clients. Finally, we'll tackle the real world challenges, people who resist extra security measures, old software that doesn't want to cooperate, and everything else that can trip you up when rolling out zero trust. And of course, I'll wrap things up with a quick look ahead at the next steps and what you can expect in the upcoming episodes. I want to set the stage, first of all, and talk about the problem with traditional security. Let's start with the old school way of thinking about security. Imagine a big medieval fortress, a moat around it, and a single drawbridge. Once you're inside that drawbridge, you're basically free to roam. For decades, companies treated corporate networks like these castles, protect the perimeter, and everything inside is trusted by default. The cracks in this model have become painfully evident. Employees work from anywhere. Data lives in multiple cloud environments, and your internal network might be full of personal devices. Attackers have so many ways to slip in, phishing emails, stolen credentials, misconfigured cloud buckets. And once they're in, the old approach has no additional checks, so they can move laterally, rummaging around, sometimes for months before anyone even notices. We've seen big names like major telecoms in 2023 publicly admit that they needed a new approach after repeated breaches. And it's not just them. Government agencies, healthcare organizations, e-commerce sites, everyone's grappling with a threat landscape that laughs at simple perimeter security. The main takeaway from this episode is the zero trust core principle, and that is never trust, always verify. Zero trust flips the whole castle model on its head. You might hear the phrase never trust, always verify a lot, but what does that actually look like? Let's break it down. First off, identity matters more than anything for both users and their devices. That usually means multi-factor authentication, strong passphrases, and sometimes even checks to make sure that you have the latest security patches installed. Essentially, if you're not who you say you are, or if your laptop is outdated and vulnerable, you're not getting in. It's as simple as that. Next comes microsegmentation, which is like turning your network into a series of locked rooms. Even if an attacker slips into one room, they can't just wander into the rest of the house. Each door requires its own key. So one compromise doesn't automatically spell disaster everywhere else. Then there's continuous monitoring and analytics. It's not enough to check your credentials once at the start of the day and assume, that everything is fine. You keep an eye out for strange behavior in real time, like a login from a random country at 3 a.m. or somebody trying to access files that they've never touched before. The system can automatically flag, challenge, or just simply deny that activity. Finally, adaptive security is about making sure all these extra steps don't turn your workday into a giant security hassle. If you usually log in every morning from, your home office, for example, the system recognizes that pattern and won't bug you with endless prompts. But if you suddenly appear on a new device in the middle of the night, then, it's going to ask you a few questions. The bottom line is zero trust isn't about being paranoid. It's about accepting that no single gate will stop every attacker. By verifying identity continuously, locking down each section of your network and watching for unusual activity, you're ready to adapt and contain any threat as soon as it appears. Let's look at a real world case study. Let's dig into one standout example that shows how zero trust can actually work. We often hear about NASA modernizing the security posture. They have a mix of legacy systems and cutting edge projects, plus extremely sensitive data. It's like having one foot in 1970s Apollo era tech and another in future Mars missions. Around late 2023, NASA publicly outlined a more aggressive shift to zero trust. They rolled out strict user authentication across, different departments and use microsegmentation to isolate critical mission data from day-to-day administrative tasks. The result was a major drop in lateral movement attempts, meaning if an attacker compromised one user account, they simply couldn't, automatically jump into deeper systems. Officials noted that a potential phishing incident, which happened a few months later, of course, ended up being a non-issue because the attackers were thwarted almost immediately. They never got past that first point of entry. And it's not just NASA. We've got smaller private sector examples like certain healthcare companies who reported that once they segmented their network, one infected machine no longer shut down an entire hospital wing. And that's zero trust in a nutshell. Containment and continuous verification. So a single breach doesn't explode into a full-scale crisis. Here, there are practical steps for big organizations. Now, if you're working in a big company with thousands of employees and hundreds of apps, the very idea of zero trust can feel overwhelming. But here's how major players have typically tackled it. They start by getting identity under control. That means a single centralized identity and access management, IAM system. Think Okta, think Azure AD or Ping Identity, where multi-factor authentication MFA isn't optional. If you can't verify who's knocking, there's no point having fancy locks everywhere else. Next, they map out the network. You can't break something into smaller chunks if you don't know how it's all connected. That means figuring out which apps talk to which databases and which employees or user groups actually need access to each system. Once they have the lay of the land, they segment carefully. Critical assets like finance, customer data, or your proprietary secrets get locked down first. Then over time, they expand that segmentation to the rest of the network. And after that, it's time for continuous monitoring. They use tools like Splunk, Microsoft Sentinel, or IBM QRadar. They scan for oddities around the clock. A weird login attempt at 4 a.m. on a Sunday, that's definitely setting off an alert. Real-time response is everything. If you can't act fast, then what's the point? Finally, they iterate and communicate. Policies wouldn't be perfect out of the gate. So it's an ongoing process. Just be sure everyone in the company understands why they might see extra prompts occasionally. And more importantly, how those prompts keep them and their data safe. Now, I can imagine, an executive listening to this podcast and wondering, isn't this going to cost me a fortune? Well, sure. Rolling out enterprise grade zero trust can have a price tag, but consider the cost of a massive data breach, both in dollars and reputation. The ROI on doing this right can be huge. Now let's shift focus to small businesses and solo practitioners. If you're a solo practitioner or you just run a small business, don't assume zero trust is just for the big guys. You can adopt a lot of these principles on a smaller scale, often for little to no extra cost. The first step is setting up MFA, that's the multi-factor authentication, everywhere you can. Email, cloud services, code repositories. It's one of the simplest ways to shut down attackers who might have, gotten a hold of your password. Next, look at the built-in features of the cloud services you already use. If you're on Google Workspace or Microsoft 365, explore their context-aware access settings, which offer zero trust flavor. Even Slack or GitHub have security settings that help control who's allowed to log in and from where, importantly. You can also segment your data on a budget. Don't keep financial records in the same folder as routine documents, and limit who can open which files. Even if you only have a few employees, making sure that they don't all have, blanket access is a big deal. Then there's monitoring. It might sound fancy, but all it means is you set up alert for suspicious logins like weird IP or new device showing up at 2 a.m. Plenty of services let you enable these notifications for free or at a low cost. Finally, keep educating yourself and your clients. Subscribe to podcasts like this to keep you informed. You don't have to be a cybersecurity guru to explain why it's a bad idea for everyone in the office to share the same admin password. Like, come on. Small changes in policy can go a long way, especially if your clients are unaware of basic security practices. So if you're running a 10-person startup, you don't need the entire enterprise security suite, but you do need a zero trust mindset. It's a framework of thinking. Every request is validated. Privileged access is minimized, and you keep an eye on anomalies 24/7. That's the basic philosophy of zero trust. And then, how should cybersecurists think about zero trust? If you're just starting your cybersecurity journey, or you're someone who always keeps an eye on emerging trends, zero trust is a terrific area to dive into right now. Having the know-how to design, implement, or advise on these solutions is a standout skill in today's market. You want to get familiar with frameworks like NIST SB 800-207, which lays out all the core principles. There are plenty of cybersecurity labs online that can let you practice everything from microsegmentation to configuring MFA, so you can see how these pieces work in a hands-on environment. Some certifications even offer specialized zero trust modules or vendor-specific training. And if that aligns with your career goals, it can really boost your resume. And if you plan to work with clients, it's worth building a short assessment checklist. Ask them about their current IAM setup, their network architecture, and the data they can't afford to lose. Often, they just need a little prodding to realize where the biggest vulnerabilities lie, and that's where you can step in to help. Let's field a hypothetical question from a newbie. Does zero trust mean I literally trust nobody ever? Or not exactly. It means trust is always contextual and verified. If you match the correct identity, device, posture, and user pattern, you're granted precisely the level of access you need and nothing more. Now let's talk about the pitfalls, culture shifts, and ongoing maintenance. Even the best security strategy fails if people don't buy in. One of the biggest hurdles is pushback from users who are used to logging in once and never thinking about security again. Communicate early and often show them the real world breach stories and why these steps matter. Emphasize that they protect not only corporate data, but also personal information like payroll, health records, or private emails. These are important data. Legacy systems can also be a nightmare. Some older applications just won't play nicely with modern security protocols. You might need temporary workarounds or, in worst case scenarios, an accelerated retirement plan for outdated software. And once you're up and running, keep in mind that zero trust is a continuous process. Threats evolves, your environment evolves, policies need to be revisited periodically, especially as new employees join or the old ones leave. So the main gotchas, the cultural resistance, ancient software, and the temptations to set it and forget it. The remedy? Education, incremental modernization, and routine policy audits. All right, we've covered a lot of ground, from the cracks in old school perimeter security to the core tenets of zero trust, plus a look at how NASA and others are using it in the real world. We've even touched on how big enterprises, small teams, and individuals can bring these principles to life without breaking the bank. Before we sign off, here are a few quick takeaways to keep in mind. First, trust has to be earned, not granted. Just because someone's on the network or managed to guess the right password doesn't mean they should get the free reign. You've got to prove you belong every step of the way. Second, micro-segmentation is huge. By splitting your environment into smaller zones, you make sure a single breach can't cascade into a total meltdown. Third, continuous monitoring. Continuous monitoring cannot be an afterthought. Attackers move fast, and you need real-time visibility to catch them before they dig in too deep. Finally, culture matters. If your team doesn't understand why they're being asked for extra steps like MFA or new login prompts, they may see it as a nuisance rather than essential protection. Communication and education go a long way, as we've discussed earlier. In our upcoming episode, we'll drill down into specific zero trust tools, frameworks you might want to try, and we'll share tips on how to handle the inevitable questions about budget and leadership buy-in. So make sure you stay tuned for that. This has been Bytes and Volts Dialogue. If you have questions or you want to share your own zero trust journey, maybe you've had a big success story or you're in the thick of rolling it out, let me know. And until next time, remember, never trust, always verify, and keep your data locked down.